Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports coming to you worldwide on the Big C Sports Network, on the number one network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the number one sports show in the universe. According to Big C and the good old boys down south, I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners in Latin America, also across the pond, and London, England, as well as Paris, France, and of course you good old boys from Africa. You know we love you in Africa, even though they keep sending us hate mail, Big C. Also, I want to say thank you so much for your good old boys up in Canada. But there's no one we love more than the good old boys down south, in the land of the free, in the home of the brave. We have me going solo tonight. I know Big C's in travel mode down south, getting ready for the big game between Alabama and Clemson. Is going to be played at the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, Louisiana. I know Big C has been down there for a couple of days, and I hear Big C there's a shortage of beads going on down in South, down there in New Orleans, so hopefully you return some of those beads back before you get on the plane and head back to your destination, Big C. I do want to say today is a beautiful December the 28th, 2017, in the land of the free, in the home of the brave. So much going on in the world of sports, and I love Big C Sports. And I appreciate being on the number one network in the United States of America. And we're heard all across the pond. And in fact, Big C Sports is heard all around the world. Big C, we know we talk a lot about NFL. We talk a lot about college football. And then, of course, the NBA. But I do want to bring up some of the things we were talking about that affect the world of college football. And number one, there's so many games, and we'll touch on that in just a second. I do want to say this segment is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive yours, tell them Charlton and Big C sent you. The number one thing, and we touched on it yesterday, the world of college football. Who doesn't love college football? Everybody loves the game. And the reason that we have college football is because there's a way to get free labor for the professional leagues. The NFL, obviously you make money when you get a pro contract. But what happens when you're not a pro player? What happens when you're trying to make your way in the world of the sports business? There will be ways that you can get in and get paid, but there's not a lot of jobs out there to offer. So why does college football, why is it so popular now? We talked about yesterday, Big C, how there's a federal judge that they turned down the NCAA's ability to try to run the whole system. And it was by a federal court, of the Supreme Court, John Paul Stevens. He delivered the opinion that the NCAA had violated the Sherman Act with this stranglehold on television contracts and televised football. It also affects basketball. This goes back into a 1981 ruling when we had some things going on in the world of sports. And you consider, we talked about Oklahoma playing a game against Southern California. There were two top 5 football teams in the world of college football. A lot of people want to see that. At that time, if you looked at all of the matchups, over 200 stations televised that broadcast. And again, ABC may have stations all over the country, so that's how you get the 200 stations. It didn't mean that there were 200 different TV networks doing it, but 200 different stations televised the Southern California-Oklahoma game back in 1981. That game was played on September 26th, and USC won that game in the final 2 seconds by the score of 28-24. And why is that important? It's important because Appalachian State also played the Citadel, okay, on the same day. 2 lesser-known programs, not the same scale of competition that you have with the USC and in Oklahoma. And they both received the same amount of money from the networks. That's because the NCAA had agreements with some ABC affiliates to only cover so many games. And what happened that year is a lot of people wanted to know, how can we get our programs on network television, because of the tremendous amount of money that was poured into the coffers of the NCAA. Now, we love the NCAA. There's nothing wrong with that. But when they decided that they were going to bring money into the coffers, they were not putting this money necessarily into the schools that made the money. Now, the major universities like a USC, like an Oklahoma, or even today's climate, where Alabama's been the king of the hill for the last several years. You have Clemson. They're playing down in the Sugar Bowl. That's the game Big C's going to be covering. They've been battling for the last 3 years now to see who's going to win the national championship. And then you also look in the Rose Bowl. The Georgia Bulldogs will play the Oklahoma Sooners. These programs have always been top programs in NCAA, so they're always on TV. You can go back to the days of Herschel Walker, where he played at Georgia. Would have been the most, the most dominant running back in the history of college football. He only played 3 years at Georgia, and we know he had a stint with the USL under the great Donald Trump, who had the New Jersey Generals and helped bankrupt the USL when they tried to compete with the NFL for the broadcast ears. But you think about what happened and why we love college football, why we see so much of it. The lower cut ruling in a case in 1982 said that there's no dispute to the fact that, but for the NCAA contract, no broadcast will be willing to pay the same amount for the Citadel Appalachian State game as they did for USC Oklahoma. Think about that. Why do they make so much money? Why is it $1 billion industry? It's all because of the money that the TV revenue brings in. It's not necessarily because somebody's going to pack a seat. Are they going to fill an 80,000 seat stadium or a 100,000 seat stadium? This is all set up by the revenue that's created by the TV contracts, and that's important. But think about the problem that it caused for, say, a school like Appalachian State, or even out here in the Pac-12. You have Washington State up in the great Northwest, not a large population. There's no way they compete TV-wise with USC or UCLA. But because the Pac-12 now has its own network, they can get some of that share of the pie that is normally just going to USC and maybe a UCLA, or at times an Arizona State or Washington was good. You know, Oregon came on strong over the last 10 years, and so because of the Pac-12 network, these other schools were able to contribute or participate in some of the money grab that the networks provided. But when you had ABC Sports, they were paying the same amount of money for an Oklahoma USC matchup as they would pay for a Citadel Appalachian State matchup. So now that we have so many bowl games out there, they're carried on different networks. And why is this important? You got to know the reason behind it. The Pac-12 has their own Pac-12 network. They're one of the Power 5 conferences. You also look at the SEC network, which is a $60 million package. They have their own network. You have the Big Ten network. They have their own network. No longer do they have to wait for the NCAA to decide if they're going to make money on their programs. And that's important when you come up to this time of the year, and everybody loves the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl. That was always a game between the Big Ten and also the Pac-10 at that time, now the Pac-12. And people say, why is that? It's not because they loved each other so much. It was because the networks paid to see that part of the country in the Big Ten, which travels very well, playing the West Coast teams, which also travels well but did not have to travel as far. And let's just be honest, in the Big Ten Conference, where you have schools like Ohio State, you have Michigan State, Wisconsin, you have teams like even Nebraska moved in there so they could get some of the pie. And then Penn State, you have programs that have 100,000 seat stadiums and they pack them. And because that's attractive to TV, the ABC wanted to keep that contract with the Big Ten and the Pac-10, and now moved on to the Pac-12, because you're always going to have, for the most part, USC would represent the Pac-12 in the Rose Bowl, or it would be a top Washington team. You know, Washington's from a big market up in Seattle. There were times when Arizona State would challenge, and they got to a Rose Bowl when they had Jake Plummer as a quarterback back in the day in the 90s. So they could count on these big media centers. UCLA was also a big draw. And they wanted the Pac-12 to play the Big Ten champion every year because they could count on that. Now, let me ask you this question. If you think about it, in Big C, we talked about it many times. Why? And I love what they're doing now with the bowl games. We had that tradition of the USC, Ohio State, USC, Michigan, USC and Penn State, as we had a couple of seasons ago. Washington would play against a Big Ten champion, say Michigan State, or sometimes a Penn State. And the reason that was great is because you always knew who was going to be there. They could sell hotel seats and rooms way before the game was played. What I like now, and we saw it not long ago when Oklahoma came out and played Washington State, also on ABC Sports. There is a case to be made for the new format. When the Rose Bowl is one of the host cities for the major four games, the Final Four, they'll bring a crowd from Georgia and Oklahoma, thousands of miles to play in Los Angeles at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, actually. But they'll bring them to Southern California. And they'll bring a big following. They will actually sell out the Rose Bowl on New Year's Day to see that semifinal matchup between, top-ranked, Oklahoma's a dominant team, and Georgia's dominant. They're going to see those two teams, and they're going to have a large crowd coming from the South. I mean, think about what that means. TV knows where to track the money. And there's a lot of lesser tier bowls out there that won't bring the same kind of crowd following, but they'll also bring in enough people to say we want to have, our football program represented. And what we see right now, and what we love at Big C Sports is that we can cover it all. We're not just tied to covering either one conference or one region of the country. I'm in California from the West Coast. Big C calls in, from the Southeast and the East Coast, doing his thing every Monday through Friday. And if you look at some of the games that we've had already, going back to December 16th, does anybody even recall the Celebration Bowl? That game was played in Atlanta. It was North Carolina, A&T. They were 12-0, and they had Grambling coming in from the MEAC. They're out of the South, 11-2 in the season. And North Carolina won that game by the score of 21-14. If you think about it, Grambling is not one of the heritage programs like a USC or, say, an Alabama or Georgia. But Eddie Robinson, the late Eddie Robinson, who coached to more wins at Grambling State than anyone in the history of college football, and he sent more NFL players on to play in the world of the NFL than even some of the bigger-known heritage schools. On December 16th, the New Orleans Bowl in New Orleans, Louisiana, of all places, Troy came in at 11-2. They played North Texas at 9-5, and Troy won that game by the score of 50-30. Why is that important? It goes back to the 1981 ruling where they only had a few big bowl games on, and we had mainly the major conferences splitting that money. Now you have schools like Grambling that are getting money, as well as North Carolina A&T, as well as Troy, and even North Texas getting money because the Supreme Court said you can't monopolize this system. The next shoe to fall has to be how do we get money into the athletes, primarily African-American players, to make it equitable for them, because that has to happen too. We look at another game, the Cure Bowl in Orlando, Florida. Georgia State came in at 7-5, and that's not a good record, but they'll take more schools because they have to find a way to get these sponsors to pay out something, so they put teams in with a 7 wins and 5 losses. They played Western Kentucky that came in with a losing record. Think about it. A losing record at 6-7 made a bowl game. How many people want to go see a team that couldn't win half of their games in the regular season, Big C, and now they're in a bowl game for people to fly across the country and watch? And Georgia State won that game by the score of 27-17. It's great for the college kids. In fact, they get the exposure, maybe even another look by some NFL programs, but it's not going to help them necessarily, improve their chances of being drafted. Another game that was out here more on the West Coast, you could call Las Vegas the West Coast. We know everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, supposedly. But in Las Vegas, they had Boise State, which is a Mountain West Conference champion, and they played Oregon out of the Pac-12. Boise State came in 11-3 with just a conference championship that they had won, beating Fresno State up in Boise, Idaho. And then Oregon had a down season. But a down season for Oregon, we know that Coach Taggart went back to the old state of Florida where he came from and to start coaching back there again. So Oregon had, some young players that have to break in a new coach, and they played strong, but they didn't play well enough to beat Boise State. Boise State won that game by the score of 38-28. Think about what Boise's done. As a small market program, they would never be on TV had it not been for the NCAA losing its fight with the court system and trying to monopolize the money that comes in the world of college football. Who wants to share the money? Because I know a lot of you good old boys down south, you don't even want to share your drinks, let alone sharing, the tens of millions of dollars that pours in to these bowl games. Boise State against Pac-12 competition, over the last 10 times they've played Pac-12 schools, they've only lost twice. They're 8-2 over the versus Pac-12 competition, and they lost a game just earlier this year against Washington State up in the Palouse when Washington State was rolling. But again, that Boise program, there would be no way that they would be on TV in being able to play some of these Power 5 schools if it were not for the Supreme Court telling the NCAA you cannot monopolize the system. So congratulations to Boise State. In that game, Oregon was actually favored by 7 coming from a larger conference. We have also December 16th, New Mexico in Albuquerque. Okay, the New Mexico Bowl in Albuquerque. Marshall with an 8-5 record versus Colorado State out of the Mountain West. And they came in at 7-6. Again, who wants to travel across the country to watch a 7-6 team play? But you think about it, people do. Marshall out of West Virginia, a 31 28 win over Colorado State. Both teams had a good time flying into Albuquerque, but Colorado State was favored by 5. I bring that up again. They're from a larger conference. But these smaller schools, when you put them in a bowl game, they get the chance to prove that they're just as capable as some of the bigger market programs. And that's what I like about the new bowl system. You can't just hide behind the fact that you're in a big conference when they make you play in a bowl game, and sometimes they'll put someone who's a lesser quality opponent up against you. And as Boise State and Marshall have shown over the years, they actually have a way of winning those games. Another game that was played on December 16th, the Camellia Bowl in Montgomery, Alabama. Middle Tennessee 7-6, and they were playing Arkansas State with a 7-5 record. Middle Tennessee won that game by the score of 35-30 over an Arkansas State team. Arkansas State was favored by 4. Why do I bring that up again? These teams that were favored were from larger conferences. Normally you'll see them on TV more than the smaller market teams. But because there's so many sports camps, and there's so many teams all over the country that have a sports camp, these smaller programs can send their top flight players to these combines, and they'll practice along with some of the players that go to the bigger schools. I remember, this goes way back into 1996. I think it was down at Cal State Fullerton, and I did some work with Cal High Sports, and they had the Nike Combines where they would take the top kids from out the top 11 western states, and they would all come to a sports combine. They also had one up in Northern California over in Concord. And I never forget seeing some of the top athletes. Some are going to big schools and some are going to small schools. But what I did see that a lot of schools benefit from now, and this is going back 20 years, the top kids will come to these combines, and you from a smaller school can play against some of the programs, the guys that come from bigger high schools. Say Northern California, you have Mater Dei. From Southern California, Northern California, there's a De La Salle out of Concord. There's Grant of Sacramento. You have Clovis West out of Fresno. You know, some of the top marquee programs that you'll see, as well as some of the schools that are smaller market programs. For example, in Northern California, you have athletes that go to a school called Del Oro up in Northern California. Randy Fasani went there, one of the better quarterbacks in the history of Stanford football. But he never would have been well known because Del Oro at that time, they didn't play schools like De La Salle. They didn't play a Clovis West or someone like a Grant. They were on a smaller division. Also, you go out to Modesto. Modesto has a great school, a private school called Central Catholic of Modesto. Their programs are just as good as anybody else on the state level, but they don't have the athletes to compete with a De La Salle year after year, or someone like a Grant of Sacramento or a Clovis West of Fresno. But because of the combines, they're able to go out and they can showcase their athletes. And because these athletes can go to a combine, the coaches at these smaller programs, some that I just mentioned, they can go to the combines and see how they do versus top competition. If you go to Southern California, we just had Mater Dei out of Santa Ana, just won the state national championship at Sacramento State over the weekend. They beat De La Salle just a couple of weeks ago. And Mater Dei has right at about 15 to 17 kids that are all D1 recruits. That means a lot of them will go to USC, or they'll go to UCLA, or they'll go to Washington, or sometimes they'll go to Georgia. They can go all over the country because they're a private school and they can pull. You have St. John Bosco or Bellflower. They played a game in Southern California, and not only did they play in Southern California, the week before they played St. Thomas Aquinas out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, one of the Florida perennial powers. And because they can't find competition sometimes in their backyard, they'll travel all over the country and do it. I know they also played a team from Washington, D.C., and they're doing that over and over again because you can go where the best talent is when you're a private school and you have the money to do it. A lot of the programs in Southern California do it, whether you're a Mater Dei, whether you're a St. John Bosco, a Centennial of Corona, or if you look at a school called IMG Academy out of Florida, what are they doing playing a school from California, Big C? I know that's a little bit farther than a bus ride. They're flying airplanes across the country to play other high school programs because the competition has gotten so good on a national level. So they're starting to act like a lot of the college programs. Now, what I brought up earlier with the NCAA losing and with the Supreme Court, and they made football available to other networks too. Even the high school football programs, you'll find them on nationally televised games. A lot of that goes back to the ruling in 1981 Well, the Supreme Court said that the NCAA cannot monopolize all of the sporting teams, and so we love that because here at Big C Sports we cover everything from football, we cover the NBA, we cover the NFL, we cover college football and basketball, the Olympics, soccer, boxing, MMA. We cover all of the major events. We even give a lot of homage to the high school programs. So again, in Southern California, you have a school in San Diego area like Helix High School, the alma mater of Reggie Bush and also Alex Smith. They played Folsom out of Sacramento for the state championship at the Division I level, and Folsom won that game in a 49-42 shootout. These games are made more possible because California decided, with the help of Cal High Sports and also Max Preps, when they started ranking school programs, they realized at a time we used to just have regional championships. There was a time when they started doing state football champions way back in the 20s. And Bakersfield High School, I think, has won more state championships than anyone at that time. And they went away with having the state championships. A lot of people said it was too far to travel. We don't want the kids to get hurt. But something happens called money. Big C, what happens when money comes in? The CIF says we want some of that money too. And when you have a sponsor, say like a Nike or Reebok or Gatorade, when they come in and sponsor, you better believe some of those schools, they'll say, hey, we'll take the bus ride, 8 us, like from Helix out of San Diego. They're closer to Mexico than they are to Sacramento, and they drive an 8-hour bus ride up to Sacramento to play in a state high school football game, and it's great for the kids. But again, it's all made possible because of the sponsors. They even have games that are televised, and I remember covering a lot of games in the Bay Area for high schools and seeing a lot of these high school kids go on to the college level. And so when you hear programs like a game in Las Vegas where Boise beats Oregon, or you have a game in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where you have Marshall versus Colorado State, a lot of these high school kids, they travel to these combines that I just talked about, and so coaches can see that they have a lot of good players from all over the country, not just the larger programs. Back to some of the bowl games. And if you think about it, who would have thought that in the Camellia Bowl in Montgomery, Alabama, Middle Tennessee at 7-6 would play at Arkansas State at 7-5? The reason they do it, there's a lot of talent, and they can't all go to one school or the big schools, so they go to smaller programs. Just jumping around on a few more bowl games that caught my attention. You have the Frisco Bowl in Frisco, Texas. Louisiana Tech 7-6, and they played SMU, a 7-6 program, and Louisiana Tech won 51-10. Now, SMU was favored by 5. That's another example of what I talked about. Some of these combines will produce great talent from smaller programs, but they can't all get recruited by the big boys. So they'll go to smaller schools. They're just as talented, and when they get the chance to play in the field, oftentimes they'll beat some of these bigger programs. So that's what I love about seeing the bowl games with some of the smaller teams that are actually thrown into the pie, and they can make some of the millions of dollars that's part of the NCAA system and the world of college football. And you'll see a lot more of it in basketball too. So when you think about it, it's not going to go away anytime soon. It's going to stay here for a long time, and we're at Big C Sports want to make sure that we cover that. I do want to say that sports is a billion-dollar industry, and boys and girls sports is the foundation to this billion-dollar industry. And for every athletic and sporting event, you need athletic and event insurance. We work with Ben and Mark. They've been around for half a century. They work with Big C Sports. Whether you're a pro team, a collegiate team, a high school team, even your mom and pop soccer leagues, when you reach out to them, let them know that Big C sent you. Also, a few more words in the world of college football, the bowl lineup. It seems to be almost exhausting because there's so much of it. And we'll jump up to the Armed Forces Bowl, played on December 23rd in Fort Worth, Texas. Army with a 42-35 win over San Diego State. Both programs came in 10-3. You love when the military actually good programs that make it to the bowl games because they serve our country so well, and we do want to pay homage to our military brass, the ones that are out there keeping us safe. You know, even when we're asleep at night and taking things for granted, like eating too much food, hot dogs and cornbread and collard greens and ham hocks. If you're more of a southern flavor, out here in the West Coast, a lot of people eat pizza. Big C, I'm sure you guys have heard of pizza every now and then, in between eating collard greens and ham hocks and all that good old boy stuff. So we love it, and that's why we talk about it so much. In the Hawaii, in December 24th, in the Honolulu Bowl, the Hawaii Bowl in Honolulu, they had Fresno State with a 10-4 record playing Houston with a 7-5 record. And Fresno State, you got to be impressed by what they did. This program went 1-10 last year. They bring on Jeff Tedford, who played at Fresno State under the great Jim Sweeney, who also, was one of the starting quarterbacks in the California Raisin Bowl when they started that game back in the 80s down in Fresno. And Fresno State with a big win over Houston, 33-27. Houston was actually favored by 1.5 points. Think about the Houston market. Down there in the state of Texas, where football is big. But football is also big in the Central Valley. I'm not going to say it's as big as what you have in the state of Texas. Texas really loves, eats, sleeps and breathes high school football. And so for a program out of Houston, and maybe one of the most crazy states in the union for football, you have a school from Fresno in the Central Valley of California. Now, Fresno, a lot of people may not know this, but it's the 5th largest city in California. Houston, I believe, is one of the top 10 population-wise in the United States of America. I believe I've heard is right around the top, one of the top 5 largest city in the country. And so for Fresno State, a smaller market, to beat a school like Houston, the athletes are pretty similar. In fact, I thought Fresno had better athletes because they recruit a lot of Californians, but they're a much smaller market than Houston. But even a small market program, when they get a chance to go and compete against some of the bigger boys, then they'll find a way to win that game or at least play as well. And so congratulations to them. Also, I want to send out some congratulations to the Kansas State. Think about it. The Wildcats played in the Cactus Bowl in Phoenix, Arizona, and they beat UCLA. Kansas State comes in at 7-5 on the season. UCLA comes in at 6-6, and Kansas State was favored by 6.5, and they actually won that game against UCLA. So you can't always say that the small markets won't beat the bigger markets. We see it over and over again. And some of the games that are happening today in this great country, and again, we love football. That's why I love bringing you these scores. When we look at today in the Military Bowl in Annapolis, Maryland, that game was played with Navy versus Virginia. And then also in the Camping World Bowl in Orlando. Does anyone go camping in Orlando? I know that's down there where Disney World is, Big C. A lot of people go to Disney World and camp down there. But I didn't think they'd get a bowl by the name of Camping World Bowl in Orlando, in Oklahoma State and Virginia Tech in that game. So we can run up and down the slate and talk about some of the games that are played. A game that really hits home to me, something that I've watched over the years, is the games that are coming up on New Year's Day. I know we're going to get through Arizona's going to play the Arizona game down in Tucson, Arizona. Utah State and New Mexico State, they play tomorrow, as well as the Cotton Bowl in Arlington, Texas. And that's going to have USC and Ohio State, a game that I really want to see. This is a time of the year when normally you would see these two great programs playing in the Rose Bowl. And we talked about earlier the heritage programs that will play in the Rose Bowl, and they'll have teams come out here, and they're always going to travel. Everyone loves the fact that USC is a big West Coast power. We know Ohio State, they're a team that has traveled very well in the horseshoe. They said over 105,000 at Ohio State on campus. And then you have USC, the tradition of Southern California, and all their bowls and national championships and Heisman Trophy winners. This is what makes it exciting for me. That's why I love college football. And these are two teams that were always on TV. It goes way back to Woody Hayes and John McCabe when they played Archie Griffin, versus Charles White. You have so much history in those games. I think we're going to see the same kind of the talent that you'll see on these two programs there as well as anybody in the country. I mean, if you put USC on the same field with someone like Oklahoma or Georgia or Clemson or Alabama, this team would compete against them. If you put Ohio State, was just missed out on being considered for the Final Four in a game against either one of those programs, they would also compete. But they're in a lower tier game this year, and that's why I think they're going to expand the playoffs over the next several seasons, because there's too much money being left on the table when you leave programs like USC and Ohio State without the chance to win a national championship. When USC comes in with an 11-2 record, they're the Pac-12 champions. Ohio State comes in at 11-2. They're the Big Ten champions. To not have the Pac-12 champion and the Big Ten champion in the games that can run for a national championship when both schools are loaded with national championships in their history, the NCAA is realizing how much money they're losing out by not having them play in a playoff game. They're mostly just in a bowl game. And just for the numbers, the people in Las Vegas, they have Ohio State favored by 7.5, and that game's going to be played down in Texas. I wouldn't be surprised who wins that game, but I just want people to pay attention. A lot of these players, if it were not for the combines that I talked about earlier, you wouldn't find them at these places, playing in these big bowl games, making, tens of millions of dollars for the universities and nothing for the athletes. Hopefully we can change that. And so as we get through that game, we love that game. Also watching the Orange Bowl in Miami Gardens is going to be Wisconsin at 12-1. They were the Big 12 runner-up versus Miami at 10-2, and they're the ACC runner-up. These two teams, and while we're going to have an expansion of the bowls, they were also in line to play for a national championship. But because they only have 4 places, it's like Big C. You set the dinner table for 4 people, and 8 people show up. And some people are going to go home disappointed, Big C. They're going to have to get some leftovers or at least just leave and go find another place. But think about it. The NCAA is leaving too much money on the table when they don't have those big names, those marquee names, in the process of being able to play for the national championship. And, of course, we're going to get down to the Rose Bowl, and that has in Pasadena, California on January 1st. They have the beautiful Rose Bowl parade that they'll have earlier in the morning. That game will kick off at 5 o'clock on ESPN. Oklahoma's 12-1 on the season. Georgia's 12-1 on the season. Georgia's actually favored by 1. Oklahoma's out of the Big 12, and then Georgia's out of the SEC. That should be a dynamite matchup. And then to top off the game that Big C is going to be covering down in New Orleans, the Sugar Bowl, and that has an 8:45 kickoff on ESPN. And Clemson comes in 12-1, ranked number 1 in the country, versus Alabama. And Alabama just got in. They were voted in. Ohio State and Alabama, they were petitioning for that final spot to get into the national championship, the Final Four in the world of college football. And so as much as we love it, I think all of the high school programs that we always pay homage to on Big C Sports from all over the country, the ones that go to the smaller schools all throughout the state of California and Texas and Georgia and Florida and Ohio, all across New Jersey, where football is big, you get to hear about the private schools and the big programs, the schools that have about 2,000 kids. But there are also some good athletes that come from smaller cities that schools may have about 500 athletes, but they may have 1 or 2 Division I caliber athletes on their football teams. Those kids get the chance to get recruited too, all because of now. And the bowl games need more people to fill them. They can't get all the kids from the top high schools. And when they have the combines, they will go and scout these combines to recruit athletes from smaller towns all over Texas, all over California, Georgia, Ohio, Washington, Utah. They're from all over the place. In Pennsylvania, Florida, they have them all over. And so I really want to applaud some of the high schools that take the time to send their kids onto these camps. And they're sponsored usually by a Nike or Reebok or Under Armour or Adidas, and they do a good job in teaching kids. Not only are you going to college to be an athlete, but you're there to be a student athlete, and I think that's important. And I want to make sure that we always pay homage to that. The ones that can do that, they send their kids to college, and they prepare them well for the real world and not just the world of football. So as we talk about that, you'll hear more of that on Big C Sports, coming to you live on the Big C Sports Network, or the number 1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the number 1 sports show in the universe. I love to say that, Big C. I know it makes you laugh when I say in the universe. I keep hearing good old boys from other networks now saying the NBA universe and the football universe, but they all heard it first here on Big C Sports. And our final segment today on the Big C Sports Show. There's so much going on in the world of sports, and I love bringing up the fact that boys and girls sports is so popular in the world of the NCAA. They need everyone to understand that we got to find a way to help these kids get an education. So I'm so proud of the fact that that's always on top of the mind for everyone who's thinking, how can we get more kids a chance, to play sports? And how can we find a way to keep more kids involved in the world of the NCAA and getting their academics done? That's as important as anything else that we'll ever talk about in this world of broadcast, in this world of big business. We know money tends to trump. It trumps everything, no pun intended. Everybody knows if you have enough money and you have enough schools that are involved in the process of getting access to that money, sometimes people do the wrong thing because the money's so big, and they want to make sure they get a piece of the pie also. If we can do anything here at Big C Sports to make sure that every school understands that we got to talk about the education of our student athletes, we're always going to make sure we do that. We'll bring it to you all the time, and I know most people say that education is important, but if you don't find a way to talk about it all the time, the same way to talk about how much money someone's going to make, it kind of falls by the wayside. Everybody wants to be the next NBA basketball player. They want to be the next player that's going to wear a pair of Jordans, or they want to sign that $200 million contract that Steph Curry signed. Well, he didn't get that out of the gate. It took a lot of years of negotiating and working with his body, and also, scouts and talent scouts and people in conditioning to make sure that he's ready for that. But in the world of sports, it's not just how much you make, it's what you keep. So we want to make sure our athletes are always aware of that. And if we run down some of the top teams in the NBA, we look at Golden State. They're at 27-7 on the season. And what can you say about this program? Whether you look at Steph Curry or Draymond Green or Iguodala, I mean, I look at how well they're put together. But something that's going to happen to every one of these players. They're not all going to retire from the NBA. They're going to have to retire for something else. That means that they're gonna have to learn how to keep their money, because if you don't, you're going to outlive it. So when young kids, and again, I'm talking mainly to the young student athletes that go to the sports combines, they want to be the next great NBA player or NFL player. You got to make sure you get the education so you don't get taken advantage of. I love what the Golden State Warriors are doing. You look at Draymond Green. He recorded his 20th career triple-double on Monday, and that's tied in the Warriors' record held since the early 1960s by Tom Galla. And you think about that. Now, if you are a Draymond Green and he came out of Michigan State, not only does he make a lot of money, he's not the top player on the Golden State Warriors team, but he also has an education that's going to help him get through life. And I want to say I applaud him for that, and I hope a lot of young kids pay attention to that. You also look at the Houston Rockets. They're 25-7, led by James Harden, and you think about him. He's only the second player over the past 20 seasons to score as many as 130 points during a 3-game losing streak. But he still has his education. You think about that along with the other players who've done that. Russell Westbrook, who generated 135 points over a 3-game skid for the Thunder back in March. And these guys, he played at UCLA. So for the next athlete that thinks you're going to just jump from college to the NCAA and you're going to jump into the NBA, you're going to land a contract, you got to beat out guys like a Draymond Green. You got to beat out guys like a James Harden. You got to go replace Russell Westbrook's job. I think he said something that was so chilling, Big C. And one of the things that I've always loved about Russell Westbrook, he said, I have no friends. He said, and then he wanted to say, I have no friends on the basketball court, okay? But maybe he's telling the truth. He has no friends at all. But to him say, I have no friends on the basketball court was kind of chilling. It's funny and chilling at the same time. And I want young players to hear that. You're not going to make friends when you go into the pro leagues and you try to take a man's job. He's telling you even his teammates are not his friends. If you can't compete, he doesn't need you. And he's the last year's MVP. So when you're a kid, like the ball father took his kids out of UCLA, that might be one thing that he's going to try to start his own league, and maybe he will be successful doing that. But for the young, impressionable minds, they're not looking to give you their job when you come out of college or leave college trying to sign an NBA contract. Think about that. That's important because you got to have the education to fall back on. I want to look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, a 24-10 record. They lost last night up in Sacramento to the Sacramento Kings, and Vince Carter played like a rookie. And he actually outplayed LeBron James, so you just impressed with Cleveland overall. Even in their loss to Sacramento, you know they're going to be one of the teams that you have to compete with in the NBA, especially getting into the playoff run. I look at the Toronto Raptors. We love our Toronto Raptors, the only team coming from Canada, and we always talk about them all the time on the number one sports show in the universe, according to Big C and them good old boys down south. The Toronto Raptors, they're 23-8 on the season. They're a dominant team, and I think they're going to make some noise in the playoffs too. The hottest team in the NBA right now, the Raptors, they won 12 of the past 13 games. Even though they're from Canada, and they're not going to be the same media darlings because they're outside of the country, but this is a team that's every year it seems to be they're right there in the thick of things, trying to get into the Eastern Conference playoffs. And I'm really impressed with the way they've been led up there, up in the great state of Canada. So we will always appreciate them following Big C Sports. Also, back into the United States, we talk about who has the best teams and who's going to win the Eastern Conference Championship or who's going to win the Western Conference Championship. I look at a team that had, a lot going for it starting the season. They started out with a big 15-game winning streak. You look at the Boston Celtics. I know they had a lot going for them, having some good trades that they made. I know Hayward went down with a broken leg, but they're still 27-10, one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference. And you think about it, the Celtics in their 72nd season, they hosted the first Christmas Day game on Monday. Out of 72 seasons, for a great program like the Boston Celtics to finally host a game on Christmas Day, you think about, McHale, you think about Russell, you think about Bird and Ainge and Dennis Johnson, you think about Casey Jones, you think about so many great players that have played for Boston. Why did it take 72 years to get on the Christmas Day? When Boston's a great town for sports, great town for Hall of Fame athletes, but a team like Boston, it's great to see that color green on Christmas Day, and I really love the way that they've played basketball so far this season. The San Antonio Spurs, led by Coach Pop, down there in the Southwest, they're 23-11 on the season. And Paul Gasol, he recorded his 10th career triple-double in Saturday's wins over the Kings, becoming one of 8 active players with double-digit triples for his career. And you think about this. When you think about Gasol, he's not a marquee guy. He's not someone that people write home and say, this is the player that we can't miss when he's playing, unlike when they had David Robinson down there, manning the helm in San Antonio. And so, when you think about it, he's still productive. Doesn't have to be a marquee player. That's for you young players thinking you're going to leave college and go take a job of someone who plays in the NBA. When you have someone like Gasol who can score on any given night, he's still not one of the better players. And we know Tim Duncan, how much he meant to that great city of San Antonio. Look at the number 7 seed Minnesota Timberwolves at 21-13. You think about that. They had 38 fourth quarter points Monday night against the Lakers. It was the highest in a victory since November 13 of 2016 when they had identical points over the Lakers. That's a team that's very loaded. I know the Lakers have a young team. They're up and coming. I think the Lakers are going to be a really good basketball team in about 2 years, especially if they get Lonzo Ball to lift a little bit of weight. He's got to have more meat on his shoulders, because as a passer, he reminds me so much of Jason Kidd. I think he's just a lot of good things waiting to happen, especially with all the noise that's starting to, subside around there when he doesn't have to pay as much attention to that. So with all the things going on in the world of sports, we just want to make sure that all the young athletes thinking that you're going to go to the next level, you got to take the job of great players. I look at Oklahoma City, the Thunder, in the number 8 spot, okay, as far as rankings in the NBA, and everyone has their opinions. But think about this. During OKC's Christmas Day win, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, and Carmelo Anthony, you could say future Hall of Famers, they combined for 75 points, okay, while making 55% of their shots from the field. Think about that, how great these players are. And you're a kid in college and you think you're going to come into the NBA and take their jobs when Paul George, Russell Westbrook, and Carmelo Anthony combine for 75 points and make 55% of their shots. You're talking NBA basketball players. And I go back to the statements that Westbrook made. He said, I have no friends on the basketball court. So if you're a college player and you're thinking coming out and you're going to take his job, you're going to take the job of Russell Westbrook, you're going to take Carmelo Anthony's job, you're going to take Paul George's job, it's not going to happen. No matter what some of the coaches tell you, that you're just as good as the guys playing in the league, it's not going to happen. You have too many guys who have pride, they have the size, they have everything going for them. So that's why we're saying go get your college education. That's the only thing that you can really count on when the day is over. Because if you come out of college and you try to compete against someone like a Paul George or a Westbrook or a Carmelo Anthony and you don't get their job, what are you going to fall back on? I mean, that's just so important. I always love talking about that on Big C Sports. And Big C, you do it every single time. You're telling people you've been around the game. You've seen the contracts. You know how they trade you like a cup of coffee or a pair of tennis shoes. Make sure you get your education. The number 9 Washington Wizards, 19-15 on the season. I love this team, what they can be. The Wizards franchise now has played 23 games on Christmas Day. Think about Boston only won in 72 years, but Boston has a lot more championships. So that's important. Everybody wants to play in the NBA. It's a fantastic game. But when you think about how you're going to get in there and play, you got to look at a guy like a John Wall. He's the only player to produce a 20 points and 10 assists in a game, okay, this season with his team. This guy is a stud. He reminds me of kind of baby Michael Jordan, and they got a win over Boston, which was Boston's favorite. Boston has a better record. But that guy, John Wall, man, he's the real deal. I love when he has the ball in his hand, always giving Washington a chance to compete, and the Wizards want to make sure they take care of him long term. And when you look at a team that's coming in at number 10 in the NBA, it may be hard to pronounce his name, Big C. I may even chew it up. You know, I like to pay proper respect when I call someone by their name. So if I announce it by the wrong thing, I please hope he forgives me. They called him the Greek Freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Milwaukee Bucks, a 17-14 record. And you think about it, Eric Bledsoe had arguably his best game as a member of the Bucks Friday against the Hornets. Bledsoe assisted on 32 of Giannis' field goals, twice as many as other Bucks players since Bledsoe's first game with Milwaukee. I love the way that he played, recording his first 20-point, 10-assist game with the team. There's just something about that Milwaukee team led by Jason Kidd. They're young, they're talented, and you look at Giannis, he looks like, I want to say, maybe a baby version of LeBron James. And you think about how dominant LeBron James has been over the years. This is a kid up in a small market in Milwaukee. I would absolutely love to see him end up in a market like Los Angeles, where they could appreciate someone with his talent. And the kid's going to be a Hall of Famer as long as he stays healthy and keeps his head strong. I think he's going to have a great future in the NBA. We look at the Indiana Pacers, 19-14 on the season. Victor Oladipo recorded his 7th 30th point game of the season, a career high for him. And you look at Indiana, when they traded Paul George, a lot of people thought, well, we're going to have to try to rebuild. They're still in a good spot for making the playoffs, 19-14 on the season, and really love the way he plays. The Denver Nuggets. You know, Denver, since when has Denver been the team for basketball over their football team? You look at how the Broncos have struggled all season long. But the Denver Nuggets, a team that no one really looks at as challenging for an NBA championship, they're a number kind of 12th ranking in the NBA, 18-15 on the season, and they enjoyed a big week of road wins, snapping a 9-game road losing streak at Portland and a 5-game loser streak at Golden State, of all places. Big C, when I saw that they beat Golden State, I thought that something was wrong. You know I need bifocals, right? I thought that something was wrong. I had to read it twice. But no, they did find a way to beat Golden State, and you're not going to win every game of quoting to Coach Steve Kerr. So Denver, at least giving their basketball fans something to be, happy about, because the football team is playing uncharacteristically bad basketball. I look at Detroit, the Pistons in the 13th spot, 18-14 on the season. After losing a season-high 7 straight games, the Pistons have won 4 of their past 5, shooting 41% from three-point range. Only the Knicks have a higher three-point percentage during that span. And what is it about Detroit? They're not the Detroit Bat Boys like they were back in the day, but it's a team that they just grind. They have a brand new arena downtown Detroit. Not that many people know about it because they never really have sellout crowds. They got to get some more advertisers and let people know they're not playing anymore in Auburn Hills. But I really love their facility. I think Detroit's an up-and-coming team, and they're going to keep doing things the right way. If you swing out to the West Coast, if you look at the Portland Trailblazers, this is a team that had championships with Bill Walton. That was their last championship from way back in the day. And I look at what they have with Kawhi Lillard. Damian Lillard, when you think about him, a kid from Northern California, they're 17-16 on the season, and the Trailblazers won their 14th straight game against the Lakers, which tied for the second longest winning streak all time by any team against the Lakers. You think about that. The Celtics had a longer streak, but that's going way back to the 1950s. That's how far you have to go back to find a team that had as much success against that team, and that's why I like about Portland and their youth. And so when you think about Portland, they're only going to get better. They're a young team, but they have the whole future ahead of them. And I like them. Damian Lillard is a stud. They're up in Portland. Not a great media attraction. Not a lot to do up there. But this team plays good basketball. And when they get into the playoffs, they're always a team that has a chance to knock someone off. So as long as they have Lillard playing well and he's leading that franchise up in Portland, I think they at least have a chance to get into the playoffs and knock someone off. And that's a great city also, the Motor City. And I think about another team, the New Orleans Pelicans. Who would thought that having DeMarcus Cousins along with Davis, they would not be one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the league? You have 2 all-star players, 2 7-foot players, guys that you would think could dominate the NBA, but they haven't found the way to do that yet. I think they always can, but you have to gel. They're only 17 in the season, and the Pelicans, they play back-to-back games against the Mavericks and the Knicks. And you think about it. This is a team, last season the Pelicans went 5-12 on 0 days of rest. Now they have Cousins in there, should be there for the full year. He's been ejected fewer times since he left Sacramento, so he has the right temperament to dominate a game. I like the way DeMarcus Cousins plays. He's a lot like Russell Westbrook. They have no friends. And when Russell Westbrook says he has no friends, he means it in a good way. But DeMarcus Cousins really has no friends. Okay, he has no friends, but he does a lot of good charity work. So I want him to be known for that, even though he takes a lot of bashing by the media. But he's a good player. I just thought they would do better with he and Davis down there in New Orleans. I look at the Knicks in 16th place. They're 17-16 on the season with Enes Kanter. He became the 4th player in NBA history with at least 30 points and 20 rebounds on Christmas, joining the great late Wilt Chamberlain, who did it 3 times, Bob Lanier, and Bill Russell. When you think about that, you're joining those Hall of Fame names. And the Knicks, I know they're only 17-16. I know some people thought that getting rid of Carmelo Anthony would make them a better team. And maybe it has. I don't see it happening long term without Carmelo there, because we know he's made OKC a team to contend with. I think they have to get the chemistry in OKC. But without being in New York, this team right now is in the hands of Porzingis, and we'll see if he has enough in him to maybe put them at the top of the heap in the Eastern Conference over the next couple of seasons. Also look at another great team, a franchise in the Miami Heat. What can you say? Who wouldn't want to live in Miami with how beautiful that city is? We know how it doesn't seem to be a great sports town, even though it should be, because it has everything going for it right there on the ocean. And when you look at Friday's game against the Mavericks, the Heat played without Hassan Whiteside, without Dragic, without James Johnson. Justice Winslow, Deion Waiters played just 9 minutes before leaving with an ankle injury. It was Wayne Ellington who stepped up in their absence and had a career-high 28 points. This team has, they snapped Boston's win streak when Boston was on a big run. They snapped it, so they have a chance to come out and do more of what they haven't been doing. But you can't count them out. Anyone can beat anyone on any given night. 17-16 record, you would expect more out of the Heat. Go up to Utah, a 15-19 record, the 18th team in the league. And you look at the Jazz rookie Donovan Mitchell, scored at least 25 points for the 9th time this season. Saturday in a loss to the Thunder. I don't like the Jazz as much as they were, of course, when they had Gordon Hayward. Team that's going to have to rebuild. But they do love their Jazz up in Utah, a small market city, but a team nonetheless that's going to make some noise as they stay healthy and they try to replace what Hayward brought to that great franchise up in the state of Utah. John Stockton's territory and Moses Malone, Karl Malone actually. I look at the Philadelphia 76ers, only 15-18 on the season, somewhat of a disappointment so far with all of the number one teams, the number one picks they've had out of college. Again, this is why we tell you young players, you got to get your education. They've had so many players that said, I'm going to leave college for the NBA and I'm going to be a star player. And they get to the NBA and they either get hurt, they don't hold up, or something happens. But they're 15-18 on the season. Joel Embiid is a stud. Okay, had 25 points and 16 rebounds on Christmas Day. He outdueled Kristaps Porzingis for the Knicks the second straight game. Over the last 2 meetings, you think about it. He's outscored the Knicks star in points and rebounds 46-29 and 30-9 in rebounds. Okay, this guy is going to be so good if he can stay healthy. Joel Embiid, keep your eye on him. And I just want him to stay healthy, but I know he has some foot issues, but he's a really stud player and love seeing him play. Number 20, the LA Clippers at 13-19 on the season with the great Doc Rivers. Austin Rivers also set a career high in scoring each of his past 2 games. He scored 36 points in Friday's win at Houston and he went for a 38 on Saturday at Memphis. Talk about a guy who can drop him in the bucket. I know his father, Doc Rivers, great player himself, but I love when a father-son combination hits the NBA. And even though some people say he had some favoritism, no, that's just about grown men playing games, and everybody's looking for what's going to give them the upper hand. But I love the way that Rivers is playing, and of course having his father as a mentor doesn't hurt him at all. And when you think about that, I think the Clippers, again, they're never going to be the team in LA because it's always going to be about the Lakers. Even though Chris Paul left, I think they're still a team that can make some noise in the Western Conference. I look at the Charlotte Hornets, the number 21 seed in the NBA. They're 12-21. And when you start looking at teams that don't have winning records, we won't go much into what happened and why, but Dwight Howard scored 21 points and 16 rebounds in Saturday's win over the Bucks. That's the fifth time in a 20-15 game of the season. Think about this. His 20th 15 game of the season. Everybody knows that this kid had all the makings of a superstar. And maybe a lot of the pressure was on Howard because he's played in big markets. He's, in Orlando and LA. The kid he's a great personality, just doesn't have the dominance that we thought he would have, especially with the size that he has. But I really like him as a player. It just doesn't have the dominance that we thought he would have. The Lakers, number 22, 11-21 on the season. And the Lakers playing on Christmas Day for the 19th consecutive season. They missed out on the chance to break a tie with the Knicks for the most wins on Christmas Day, dropping to 22-22 overall on that great Christmas Day with the LA Lakers. But I do love the fact that Magic Johnson is at the helm of reconstructing this team. And then you have Walton as a coach. I think they have a bright future with the LA Lakers. They have so much young talent. They have the City of Angels. There's a lot of pressure to win in LA. But I think this team is going to be a dynamic team over the next couple of years, especially if they trust in Ball and Wiggins and to run that show. I look at number 23, Chicago. They're only 10-22 on the season. This is not your Jordan's Bulls. We know that. The Bulls won 17-92, lost to the Celtics. Their fifth loss by 25 points or more this season. If you're an NBA basketball team with a tradition like the Bulls, how do you lose by 25 points? I know they have some issues there. I know they're always trying to rebuild. It seems like everyone's trying to rebuild when you don't have success. But Chicago's a beautiful city. They deserve to have a top franchise, and hopefully the Bulls will find a way to get back there again. But I know it's going to take time. That's just the way it goes in this league. And if you think about it, Michael Jordan played there and made it very difficult for anyone to come in there and not find success because he's always going to be in the shadows of any coach and any great player that comes through there. They're going to compare you with some people consider the greatest ever basketball player, and that's Michael Jordan. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But there's something about Chicago. They have the number 3 largest city in the United States. They have losing football. They have losing, NBA's losing there. The Bears are not winning, and they're not winning with the Bulls. Just a lot to be said about that great city, but they don't have a lot to shoot for, even though the Cubs are the big hope for Chicago, one of the greater franchises in all of pro sports, the Chicago Cubs, and they'll be strong again this year as they run and make a good push in baseball. And, think about this. I just mentioned Chicago and their championships. Remember, with Jordan, they won 6 championships in 8 years. Okay? Never lost a championship with Michael Jordan. Coach Kerr was on the teams that helped win a championship with the great Michael Jordan. But this is not going to be the case for a long time coming to Chicago. It's not a place where a lot of people want to go anymore, it seems like. And I would think that it would be one of the top draws in the NBA, but something's wrong with the chemistry when people go to Chicago. It used to be to win a championship, and now it seems they just go there because they're drafted there. But you would think that team would have a lot of hope just because of the market size, number 3 market in the country. They have the mystique of the Michael Jordan and everything he did there with 6 championships in 8 years. But for some reason, they haven't found a way to get back that magic that they've had over the years. And then maybe they'll get it back in time, but they're going to have to do it through the draft. And when I think about other teams, that we look at the Brooklyn Nets at 12-20 on the season, they're just a team that's in New York. They're not going to do well in New York because they have the Knicks. Even if the Nets are good, people think about, they want to see the New York Knicks play. Who would you buy a ticket for, the Nets or the Knicks on the same night? The Nets recorded their best win of the season on Friday, however, beating the Wizards by 35 points. But they're still a team that's on the back burner. If I come out to California, I look at the team, the Sacramento Kings. This is a team that has so much hope, so much future. They have a new arena downtown, the Golden One Center. They're 11-21 on the season. They just beat the Cleveland Cavaliers. I love the fact that they give Vince Carter a chance to go out and play and do his thing. They just have that feel that they're coming. They remind me of the way they built the Kings back in the mid 2000s when they were competing for Western Conference championships under Chris Webber and Mike Bibby and Vlade Divac. They had some great players, and I think there's a feel that is coming back, and I hope that Sacramento can do it. It's a great city, and they deserve to have success with that franchise. You look at Tuesday's road game against the Clippers. The Kings began a 6-game homestand against Cleveland on Wednesday, and they beat Cleveland. Okay, tied for the longest of the season for the home stretch. You think about this. This team took a Cleveland team that was a little bit down because they just lost to Golden State on Christmas. And I look at this team, it's like every year they're trying to rebuild. But I think they have something special in Sacramento. I just think they're right there to start building up. And I want to see that franchise have great success. They had it under the Maloofs, and they should have it also under the new regime. I look at the Phoenix Suns, Charles Barkley's old team at 12-23. We know Phoenix is down in the desert, a team that should be a lot better than what they are, but playing in the Western Conference, it's hard to win games. And no matter who you are, everyone's still looking up at Golden State. Can you beat the Golden State Warriors? Well, you got to do it on the field. And a lot of people, you got to do it on the court. A lot of people just can't do it. But at least you have someone to show you what it looks like. Devin Booker, he's expected back this week for the Suns, who've gone 3-7 in the games that he's missed this season. This kid can light it up. Booker scored a combined 84 points. And when you look about what he did in the fourth quarter with Toronto and before he was injured, this guy is just a stud. I love it. In 2 games, 84 points before he got injured. I hope they can surround him with some better talent. The Orlando Magic coming in at number 27, 11-23 on the season. They've lost 8 in a row and 3-19 since a surprising 8-4 start. And a team in, a small market, and a lot of people are going to rally around that organization, but they're not going to compete with Miami when it comes to star appeal. If you can go to Miami or you can go to Orlando, most people would choose Miami. And I look at the Atlanta Hawks, 29th ranked. This team, for some reason, you look at Dallas at 28th, and you look at the Mavericks and the Hawks, 2 great franchises. Dallas has won a world championship in the past. And you think about Dirk Nowitzki, just a Hall of Famer waiting to happen. Think about this. This team with Steve Nash and Jason Kidd. Nash assisted on 797 of Nowitzki's field goals. Kidd assisted on 753 of his field goals, ranking first and second among his teammates over his career. I want to see him have more success winning because he's brought so much success and talent to the NBA. I want to see Dirk, go out on a winning note. May not happen this year. The Atlanta Hawks 8-25 on the season. And Saturday, the win against the Mavericks. Dennis Schroeder matched his career high with 33 points and 4 3-pointers. The last time the Hawks point guard scored that many was a home game in March of 2014 when Jeff Teague scored 34 against the Raptors. We look at the Memphis Grizzlies. The city of Memphis is kind of rolling right now. They just got the USL Soccer League team. They won out over Sacramento to get a franchise, the 24th franchise in the United States Soccer League. So congratulations to Memphis. I thought that would have gone out to Sacramento. If you look at the population of Sacramento, more Latin influence. I thought they were more, located in a place that could draw larger crowds. But you think about Memphis, a team that's always been strong in the playoffs. The Grizzlies are 3-18 in games missed by Mike Conley. Even after Saturday's win over the Clippers, they're 7-5 without Conley, and a pair of wins over the Rockets. And even in one on the road against the Warriors of all teams, you just don't expect that to happen. So we've talked about so much in the world of sports, whether it's football and then basketball. We talked about how these small market programs have been able to play the large market programs. I hope that kids consider staying in college, because if you're going to go pro, you got to take the job of people who really do it for a living. They're not doing it to be popular. Okay? Stay in college, get your education. And it's an opportunity that you have no matter how much money you have. And education is something you can earn that will stay with you for a lifetime. And while Big C is going to get ready for the the national championship playoff tournament down there in the Sugar Bowl with Alabama and Clemson. Should be a great event down there. And I'll be focused out here on the West Coast. We'll have in the Rose Bowl with Oklahoma versus Georgia, expecting to see some fireworks in that game. And I want to tell you that we love doing Big C Sports. We love that we can entertain you every Monday through Friday. I want to say today is a special holiday show, so we're coming to you later tonight at about 7:30 for the Big C Sports Show. And we will do it to you every Monday through Friday at 5 and 6 p.m. worldwide. Follow Big C Sports on the Big C Sports Network. We're the #1 network in the United States of America. Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C and the good old boys down south. As we always tell you, there's never, ever any excuse for domestic violence. If you know any woman going through that garbage, please call 911, because no woman should ever have to go through that garbage all on her own. And as we tell you on every Big C sports show, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.